All right, welcome Madison Avenue to another Wednesday night online gathering where we're going to be going through our Bible study for this week in the journeys of Paul. Before we get started, I would like to tell you that we are going to be starting back to some public services this weekend on Sunday at 11 o'clock, worship service only. We will still be live streaming on YouTube and Facebook, so I encourage you to stay home and watch that online. If you have any sickness, if you're not feeling well at all, if you're just uncomfortable with getting out yet, we certainly understand that, and we want to encourage you to stay at home and continue to watch online. But that being said, for those that are feeling healthy, those that are well, those that want to get out of the house and come in and see everybody, we certainly are going to be opening the doors and look forward to seeing everyone Sunday morning at 11. So please be mindful of that. We're looking forward to a wonderful weekend this weekend and trying to start taking some steps in getting back to normal. Now, that being said, normal is not going to be a switch we can just flip and get back to overnight. It's going to take several weeks for us to ease our way back into full services. So please be patient with us, work with us, and help us to get back to where the Lord would have us to be. So I'm looking forward to doing that over the next several weeks. Today, though, we're going to be in our lesson number 3 on the journeys of Paul. I've got our software set up again where you can see me as well as my screens here with the Bible passages, our PowerPoint, as well as our handout. The handout will be available on Facebook, so I encourage you to get on there and look that up and to have that printed out and ready to go. Our reading for this week in lesson number 3, our reading is Acts 15, verse number 36 through Acts 18, verse number 22. Now, I will go ahead and share this with you. This lesson will be a 2-part lesson. A lot of this journey, a lot of information that I didn't want to pass over in the second journey of Paul, so we're going to be breaking this up into 2 weeks. So this week we'll be looking at the first half of the second journey. Next week we'll be looking at the second half of this second journey. So lesson number 3 is going to be this week and next week, covering Acts 15 verses 36 through Acts number 18 verse number 22. So make sure that you have that read, and we're going to get right into our outline and our scripture this evening. I've already got my Bible in Acts chapter number 17. That's where we're going to be ending at tonight. Let me get that back over here to Acts chapter number 15 and where we're going to be starting at this evening in verse number 36. You'll see here in my Bible program that this is actually entitled that Paul and Barnabas separate, and that's one of the first things that we're going to be looking at here in just a few moments. In your handout, the journeys of Paul, the biblical and geographical study, here we're in lesson number 3, and as you can see here are our reading for today, Acts 15 through Acts chapter number 18. In Paul's second journey, let's look at these first couple of points here. On Paul's second journey, we're going to see that he's going to travel with Silas, Timothy, Priscilla, and Aquila, as well as Luke. So we're going to see all of these different people that are traveling with Paul during this journey. Some are traveling with Paul for the entire journey. Some are just traveling with Paul for part of the journey. And we'll look at those along the way and see who he picks up along this journey. The main route of this journey is Syria, Turkey, Greece, and Jerusalem is the main route for this journey. They traveled a total of 2,800 miles during this second journey. So that was a lot of miles. It's a lot of miles today. It was a lot of miles back then. So very long journey for sure. So would have been a long trip. This journey began at the church there in Antioch. Antioch is still what we would say today, we would say sponsoring and sending these missionaries. Antioch was that sending church. They were that church that was sending them out on these different journeys to go and to do what God had called them to do. So this journey once again began in Antioch. As Paul begins this second journey, we see that the original plan was to go with Barnabas, and that's what takes us back up here to our Bible and to the scripture that we're going to be looking at here today. In Acts chapter number 15, let's just read these first few verses of our main text, verses number 36, 37, and down a few more. It says, "And some days after Paul said unto Barnabas, Let us go again and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord, and see how they do. And Barnabas determined to take with them John, whose surname was Mark." So Barnabas really wanted John Mark to go on this trip. He really wanted John Mark to go and continue to learn and continue to grow. But if you remember from the first trip, John Mark only made it through about 3 stops. And by the 3rd stop, he was ready to go. And so John Mark departed and left and went back to Jerusalem. And we see that this was a little bit of a contention between Paul and Barnabas. And verse number 38 says, "But Paul thought it not good to take John Mark with them, who departed from them from Pamphylia, and went not with them to do the rest of the work." So again, Pamphylia was just the 3rd stop in the last missionary journey, and by the third stop, John Mark was already ready to go. And so Paul didn't like that. It didn't settle well with Paul. And this contention between Paul and Barnabas was so divisive. It was so sharp. That's the word the Bible uses here. It says that it was so sharp between them that they departed from one another. They split up. And Barnabas took John Mark with him down into Cyprus. And he went down into Cyprus to visit those families. But Paul decided to take Silas with him. We can find that there in verse number 40. It says that Paul took Silas and departed and went through Syria and Cilicia. So as we come over here to our PowerPoint, I'm going to pull up that screen now, which is the overview of all of these different places. And as we look at these different areas, I think I can zoom in here and we can get a better idea of where we're at. We see Antioch is right here, and the first journey took Paul and Barnabas down here to Cyprus through Salamis and Paphos, and then up here into Pergia and this area here. And so as they came through this area, this is the area that Barnabas and John Mark are going to go. They're going to go back down this way towards the area of Cyprus. But Paul and Silas, they decide, no, they're not going to go this way because that's the way that Barnabas and John Mark are traveling. They're going to go through the land, and they're going to come up this way through Cilicia and into Asia Minor, Laconia, and this area. And they're going to travel from Antioch by land up through this area back over here to Derbe and Lystra. And we can see this area here is where Paul and Barnabas were the time before, and now Paul is going to leave Antioch traveling by land and come back to Derbe and Lystra in this area. And we'll view more of that here in just a few moments, all right? So we can see here this is kind of where they're traveling, where they are going. All right, so this is the first few steps of this journey. So Barnabas wanted John Mark to go with them, but Paul said no. He said, I don't want John Mark to go, and this disagreement was such a strong divide that they split up. Barnabas took John Mark and headed towards Cyprus, but Paul took Silas and traveled through Syria and Cilicia. He traveled by land to begin this journey. Paul's first stops are in Derbe and Lystra. We just looked at those on the map there, so now let's zoom in on those a little bit more and start getting our journey set. We can see here that they are going to start in Antioch, and they're going to travel by land up here through Cilicia, and they're headed towards Derbe and Lystra. These are the 2 towns that was visited before. It is here that Paul and Silas Paul and Silas pick up Timothy. It is in these areas, these towns of Derbe and Lystra, that Timothy is picked up. But there's something different about Timothy. Timothy is half Greek. Timothy's father was Greek, and for the Jews, this would have been a very big problem. This would have been something that they would have been upset by, and because of that, they would not have listened to the gospel message as it was being preached. And so, to show that Timothy was serious about what needed to be done, and to show that Timothy was willing to do whatever it took to share the gospel message, Paul took Timothy aside and circumcised Timothy. And by doing this, he was showing that Timothy meant business, that Timothy had an important message that needed to be shared. And so now Timothy could not only reach the Gentile because he was Greek, but Timothy could also reach the Jew because he was circumcised, showing that he was serious about doing what God had called him to. So we can see here the politics, if you will, that were being played between these two, showing that Paul wanted to reach all people. He wanted to reach the Greek, he wanted to reach the Gentile, he wanted to reach the Jew, and Timothy was one that could do that. Timothy could reach both sides of that fence, we might say. And so Timothy was circumcised here, and that was so that he could reach the Jewish people along with the Gentile people. In verse number 5 of chapter 16, I'm going to go ahead and switch there, my Bible program now. We're going to get into chapter 16. In verse number 5, we find a very interesting verse that I'd like to highlight and I'd like to read for you. In verse number 5, it says, And so were the churches established in the faith and increased in number daily. Remember we said during that first missionary trip that Paul and Barnabas were not just seeing people saved, but people were being saved, they were being baptized, and churches were being established. And so as Paul and Barnabas established these churches and they left, well, as Paul is going north and Barnabas is kind of going southwest, we see they're going to revisit these churches that they established. They're going to check in on them. They're going to see how they're doing. And that is exactly what's happening here in Acts chapter number 16 and verse number 5. They were going to the churches that were established during the first journey, and they were checking in on these churches and seeing how they were doing. And they obviously were doing very well, because verse number 5 tells us that it was being increased in number daily. And so this is a very interesting verse that is important for us to see. Well, verse number 9, let's skip down now to verse number 9, and we're going to see a very interesting thing take place here. This is what is known as, and what we refer to as, the Macedonian call. This is a very important time during Paul's second journey and Paul's second trip, because the reality is, and we're going to talk about this here in just a few moments when we get to it here in our outline, the reality is Paul and Silas did not have plans of going into Macedonia. Paul and Silas had other plans, but you see, our plans don't always line up with God's plans. And so God had a plan and a purpose for Paul and Silas to go to a certain area in this second journey. But Paul and Silas had other ideas, and so it took some persuading of God to tell Paul and Silas, hey, listen, you need to forget your plan and you need to follow my plan. And so verse number 9 tells us a little bit about that. Let's read that very quickly here. As we look at verse number 9, we can see that a vision appeared to Paul in the night, and there stood a man in Macedonia and prayed him, saying, come over into Macedonia and help us. Now, this is an important vision about this man. Let's look back at our outline and our handout for just a few moments. This is an important vision. This man is telling Paul that they needed help, and not just any help, but they needed help of the gospel. So they weren't calling Paul over to help them with their tents. They weren't calling Paul over to help them with a building or to help them with anything else. They needed help spiritually. The gospel was needed there in Macedonia. And if we look at our map, we can see this area of Macedonia here. We can find the area of Macedonia and Philippi as they're traveling from Derbe and Lystra, we can see this long trip going over near Troas, and then Troas up into Philippi. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail here in just a few moments. But I wanted to give you this this view of the map here, where we can kind of see how far west they're actually traveling from Antioch clear over here into Macedonia, which is modern-day Greece, okay? This is all modern-day Greece today. And so we can see that there on the map. And this was a vision of a man telling Paul that they needed help, not just any help, but the gospel was needed to be preached here in Macedonia and Greece. Verse number 10 gives us another very interesting word here. Let's look back at our Bible program for a moment. Verse number 10 tells us that immediately they endeavored to go into Macedonia. So there was, even though they had other plans and other ideas, even though they had a couple other spots that they wanted to stop at, being Paul and Silas, they didn't question it. Once God told them where to go, they dropped their plans, they dropped their ideas, and they immediately left to go into Macedonia. And so we can see they headed that direction. Well, on their way to Macedonia, here's some of the other cities that they stopped at. We can see that if I can highlight those cities here. You can see them on your screen. The path to Macedonia led them through Phrygia, if I'm saying that right. I'm sure I'm not. It also led them to Galatia. It led them to Mysia, and it ultimately led them to Asia. So we can see all of that here. This is the area of Galatia up here. Asia Minor is down here. Mysia is over here. And then as they draw in, we can see them drawing in near Troy. So let me, I'll blow this map up for us a little bit and try to zoom in on that area a little bit better for you. So they're traveling across here. We can see they're coming from Derbe, Lystra. They probably would have passed through Antioch of Pisidia, which we looked at last week. No doubt they would have passed through that area for sure. They would have came very near the town of Thyatira, and ultimately up here to Troas and Troy in that area. So we can see those areas of the map. All right, let's get back to this map here and zoom back out. We can see this path that would have been taken. All right, now let's get into this here for just a few moments, if you will. I've talked about this and kind of beat around this bush for a few minutes. Now let me get actually into it so that you can see it written on paper. It's in your handout. It's point number 15. It's down here in the bottom corner of your screen right now. But point number 15, they also saw it, Paul and Silas, before God had given them this dream, given them this vision, and called them into Macedonia. They had also wanted to go over into Asia and Bithynia. So we can see that on your screen here. Bithynia would have been north. Asia would have been a little bit further to the east. And so Paul and Silas had a vision of going east and north. But God called them to go west. And so we see they went a completely different direction from what their original plan was. Another interesting development comes into plan here. Back in verse number 10, where we talked about the idea of them immediately dropping and going and doing what God had called them to do in the vision, we can see another very interesting thing that I still have highlighted here. It says, immediately we endeavored. Now, what's very interesting about this is most theologians believe that Luke was the author of the book of Acts, okay? And so we see here that Luke is the author. Luke is the one speaking here. And to this point, Luke is using terms like they and Paul and Silas. He's calling out individuals. He's talking about how they are traveling and they're going to go here and they're going to go there. But now we get to verse number 10 of Acts chapter 16, and Luke is writing, and now Luke automatically switches over, and now Luke says immediately we endeavored into Macedonia. So This gives us some interesting thought here about the idea of we endeavored. Luke has either been with them the entire time. Luke either left with them in Antioch and has been traveling this entire time, and Luke is kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? He is He's writing it down. You understand what I'm trying to say. He's writing down their journey as they're going along the way. Or the other possibility is that Luke left Antioch and met them in Troas. And Luke is beginning the journey with them in Troas. So perhaps Luke was not with them in Derbe and Lystra when they picked up Timothy. Perhaps now they're in a completely different area, and maybe even we can see possibly Luke traveling from Antioch by ship and coming up here to Troas and meeting them in Troas and continuing on. So there's a couple of different possibilities here of what took place, but my opinion, more than likely, even though it's not recorded, more than likely Luke was traveling with them all along. Luke traveled with them from Antioch to Derbe and Lystra, and then from Derbe and Lystra up to Troas. It's possible that Luke met them at a different time, but I just think it's more probable and plausible that he was traveling with them during the entire trip. So regardless, now we know that Luke is with them as well. So now we know we've got Paul, we've got Silas, we have Timothy, and we have Luke. So we've got 4 of these men that are now traveling together, going to spread the gospel message. So leaving Troas, they came to a couple of towns here that I'm not even going to try and butcher their names. You all know that I don't do very good with pronouncing these names, but you can see them there on your handout. I highlight them there for your screen, on your screen. But we see that they travel through a couple of different towns and areas, and they end up in the area of Philippi. Now, let me go up here and let me zoom back in so that we can see this a little bit better as we're looking here. We can see that they're leaving Troas. They're stopping at this little island here, which is the Apollonia, and then they're traveling up to Neapolis and then over to Philippi. So we can see this path that they would have taken. And at this point, they would have had to take a little bit of a boat trip to get to where they needed to go to the other side of the sea there, the Aegean Sea. So they're ending up in Philippi, and as they get in there to Philippi, we see a couple of very important stories. It's in Philippi we see and we learn about the woman Lydia, and Lydia is saved. Lydia, though, is not originally from Philippi. The Bible tells us that Lydia was from an area right over here in Asia Minor called Thyatira. You can see that there on your screen. I'm kind of circling it with my mouse. But she was in town in Philippi trying to sell her goods. We can see that in the scripture here, the conversion of Lydia. We see that she was a seller of purple, the Bible tells us. The Bible tells us that she was a woman named Lydia, a seller of purple, and that she was originally from the city of Thyatira, but she was there in Philippi, no doubt trying to sell her goods. While she's there in Philippi, God put her in the path of Paul. She heard the gospel message. She heard them worshiping. It says, which worshiped God. They heard us, whose heart, Lydia's heart, was opened of the Lord when she heard the worship of God, and she attended unto the things which were spoken of Paul. And then we can see in verse number 15 that she was baptized. If she heard the worship of God, she heard that Paul and Silas and Luke and Timothy were preaching the gospel. It says that she attended unto those things which were spoken of Paul. That means her heart longed for those. She was listening to the gospel message, and in her heart she had called upon that message, which was Jesus and Him crucified. And so we know that she was saved, and now we know for a fact that she was saved because she would not have been baptized if she was not saved first. And so we can see the conversion of the woman Lydia here. The Bible tells us, back to our outline, that she was baptized. And then this is the important part I want to highlight right here. excuse me, it says her and her house. And so this means her entire house was saved. So the entire house was saved, the entire house was baptized. And now we know if they're baptizing, they've also established what in Philippi? They've established a church. And that's later we can learn that even more so in Paul's letter to the church at Philippi, which we know today is the book of Philippians. Excuse me again. So we see that this is an important moment in this journey. Lydia is saved. Her entire household is saved. We have people being baptized. We have a church being established. And we see there's a very important thing that's going on here in Philippi. We can also read another important story that takes place here in Philippi, and that is the story of the Philippian jailer. The Philippian jailer is an important story. It's a story that we can learn about Paul and Silas as they are arrested. They're thrown into jail, and they are singing songs and praying prayers. And while they are there shackled to the walls of the jail, they are shouting praises and singing praises unto the Lord. They're singing these praises unto God. The jailer is sitting there listening all these things. His heart becomes convicted. He hears the gospel message, and so he's being convicted this entire time, hearing the gospel being prayed, being sung, being spoken. Well, the Lord comes down and the Lord does a miraculous thing. The Lord frees all of the prisoners, including Paul and Silas. The shackles come loose. Paul and Silas are able to walk right out of the prison cell. And because of this, the jailer is very scared. The jailer thinks all the prisoners are gone, and so the jailer thinks there's no other answer but to kill himself. But before he kills himself, Paul tells him to stop. Paul says, hey, listen, we're all here. You don't need to kill yourself. We're all right here. You're not going to lose your job. We want you to stop, and we want to tell you a little bit more about this gospel message. And so the jailer and his entire family, once again, the entire family ends up accepting Jesus, and they're baptized and added to the church there at Philippi. And so after leaving the jailer, Paul and Silas head back to Lydia's house. They get back to Lydia's house, who is their host house while they were staying there. But now people are seeking after Paul and Silas's life. And so they're going to get back to Lydia's house, and now they're going to need to get going. They're going to need to leave. And so they start packing their bags and they head out of town. Well, as they leave Philippi, they're going to pass through a couple of towns that, again, I can't pronounce very well. These two towns, and it says they left there and they headed towards Thessalonica. So as I adjust our map a little bit, as it's zoomed in here, we can see they pass through this town and they head towards down here towards Thessalonica. So we can see that area here. It's here in Thessalonica that they preach Christ's suffering. They preach about Christ's death. They preach about Christ's resurrection. And they're preaching this, and the Bible tells us 3 Sabbaths had passed while they were teaching these things. And as they're teaching these 3 things, they were teaching more than 3 things, excuse me. They were teaching a lot of things about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But as the 3 Sabbaths passed, people got more and more angry about the message that was being taught. And so after 3 weeks, we see many people that are saved, but we also see many people that are angered. One of the people that were saved, though, was a man named Jason. Jason was a man that took Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke in, brought him into his house and housed them and no doubt fed them. And so we see that these people are starting to get angry. They're starting to get upset, the people of the city. And so Jason is a new convert. He's brought these men into his home. And we see in verse number 6 of chapter 17, let's get there, let's read it. Verse number 6 of chapter 17, and when they found them not, they drew Jason and certain brethren unto the rulers rulers of the city, crying, "These that have turned the world upside down are come hither also." And so they bring Jason in. They say, "Jason, where are you hiding them? Where have you taken them? They've turned this city upside down. They've turned the world upside down, and we need to know where they are at." Well, this is an important verse here in chapter number 17, and it's one of my favorite verses of the entire book of Acts, because we see here that in verse number 6 of chapter number 17, that the leaders of Thessalonica accused Jason and the others, accused them of turning the world upside down, said, "Where is Paul? Where is Silas? Where is Timothy? Where is Luke? Help us to find them. Are you hiding them? And if you are, where are you hiding them at?" And so this is one of my favorite stories in all of the Scripture, really, especially all of Acts. We see that they are accused of literally turning the world upside down. Well, we will continue our journey next week. We're going to continue our journey of the second journey and finish out the second half of this next Wednesday night. And so I hope that you'll tune in next week and be able to look in to our lesson. By next Wednesday night, what I'm going to try and do, I'm going to try to continue these recordings so that those that are not able to come in will be able to view on Wednesday night our recordings. But I will move our recordings from posting at 5 o'clock, and I will post our recordings at 7 o'clock, okay? And that is for the fact that next Wednesday night we're going to be resuming our in-person Bible studies. So we'll be having Bible studies here in person, but it's difficult to live stream our live Bible studies because during our live Bible studies, I like to encourage people to ask questions. I like to encourage people to raise their hands and put their 2 cents in and maybe share a few of their thoughts. And it's difficult to live stream that. So what we will do is we'll have our live Bible studies here in the church house. And I encourage those of you that are able to come out, that you would come out, and we will go through this handout and these maps. We will go through them together in person. All right. But for those of you that cannot come out and are sick and not feeling well or just don't want to venture out quite yet, then what I will do is I will pre-record these lessons the way that I have been the past couple of weeks. And I will post that to post at 7 o'clock when we are live here in the church house doing our Bible study together. I will have these videos going live on Facebook for you to be able to watch and enjoy. Okay, so that's the way we will handle these going forward over the next several weeks. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope that you enjoyed the Bible passages that we looked at, that we read. I hope that you enjoyed the maps that we looked at and was able to get into. And I hope that you were able to get the handout printed out at home and be able to read along with us. So I hope that you enjoyed today. All right, thank you so much for being here with us. God bless you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you very, very soon. Have a great day.